Okay, all set? Hello, everyone. Welcome to the webinar on Defund the Military, Defend the People and the Planet. This is actually the last day of the Global Days of Action on Military Spending this year, 2021. And we are fortunate to be holding this webinar with many friends from all over. But before I go on, I'd like to introduce myself. I'm Corazon Fabros from the Philippines. I'm also with the International Peace Bureau and the Asia-Europe People's Forum. Kike, would you like to introduce yourself first?
Yes, thank you, Cora. I'll be also moderating this webinar. Thank you so much to everyone that joined us, and especially to our speakers. We're very happy to have such a nice and diverse group of speakers, and we hope we can have a nice conversation on activism for the reduction of military spending. Well, I'm Quique Sanchez. I'm from Centre de Lazo of Peace Studies in Barcelona, which also serves as an IPB office. And I've been working in the GCOMS campaign for already 3 years. This is my third GDAMS, and it's a pleasure to be here with you. Well, Cora, do you want to speak a bit about the AEPF?
Yeah, I think you know, I just would like to say a little bit about the Asia-Europe People's Forum. This is actually the 13th biannual conference of the Asia-Europe People's Forum. And for the first time, this conference is being organized in a virtual way. And we thank you for being here despite the pandemic. The Asia-Europe People's Forum is an interregional network of progressive civil society organizations from across Asia and Europe, and even in other continents. Our friends there are also involved. And it is committed to fostering people's solidarity for a socially and economically just, inclusive, peaceful, sustainable, and ecologically sensitive development within and across the two regions. We hope that and are hopefully and are sure that the AEPF13 will be an exciting event with a series of interlinked dialogues and workshops and actions and policy debates and plenary sessions. The outcome of this conference will be presented to the 13th Asia-Europe People's Meeting, ASEM13, where heads of state from Asia and Europe will have discussions on future priorities and plans. During these 8 days, we will have a range of sessions on major themes which represent AEPF's hopes for citizens of Asia and Europe. This includes, of course, the peace and security cluster that organizes this particular workshop. We are going to hear about from climate justice and just transitions, food sovereignty and resources justice, trade justice and corporate accountability, social justice and social protection, and participatory democracy, human rights, and migrants' rights. So all sessions on AEPF13 is being recorded and made available on the AEPF website. You know, the link will be pasted in a while. And along this line, we, of course, would like to ask for respectful engagement with the principles and of solidarity with one another, and request that we behave accordingly in the chat box. You're free to share information there. And we also ask that questions for the speakers are directed via the Q&A box rather than the chat box, so that it would be easier for your moderators to, take the questions that will be answered by our panelists. And thank you for, hopefully that we will have a critical discussion this afternoon. My colleague, Kike Sanchez, will of course introduce the campaign, which is the meat of this particular webinar, so that before we continue on and proceed with our webinar this afternoon. Kike?
Thanks, Cora. I don't want to take much time from our speakers, because I'm really looking forward to our discussion. But just briefly, and to give context to this webinar, I'd like to share my screen and present you with a few slides about what GDAMS has been. This GDAMS, I think, has been the longest ever, because it's been almost 40 days of action. For those of you that don't know, the Global Days of Action started 10 years ago in 2011. First, it was only one day to take action to protest military spending levels, but then it got a bit bigger to accommodate more relevant dates. The most important dates that are within the GDAMS are the tax day in the United States, which is normally at the second half of April, and which is relevant because it's when the most powerful military in the world is collecting taxes. I mean, the government is collecting taxes that we know that in more than a half go to the military. Then we have the day that when CIPRI releases new data on military spending, which this year happened on April 26th. And in the last years, we've been also including the Europe's Day of Peace and Unity, which is May 9th, because we've also been seeing that the European Union well, if it ever was a peace project, now it definitely is leaving that track, and is going through. I mean, it seems that it goes through a militarization process. And then this year we had the situation when that the tax day in the United States was postponed to May 17th. So we decided to stretch GDAMS a bit longer and also include May 17th, which worked really well for us. And so we could also enter within in the AEPF forum. So this is why we're here today, and just to let you know a few highlights from this year. This is the infographic that we prepared with our slogan, "Defund the Military, Defend People on the Planet." We try to make evident how current military spending levels don't bring any security to people, don't make us any safer, and we wanna make evident the opportunity cost that it entails. So we made some comparisons and we used some percentages of the global military spending in 2020, which was 1.98 trillion, almost $2 trillion US dollars. And we were trying to bring attention to the fact that in 2020, the first year of the pandemic, most governments across the world still decided to spend in the military, spend in arms and armies, when it was pretty obvious for I think everyone that we had other threats to our security, to our safety, as it was the pandemic, but also climate change. So just to give some examples, only 0.03% of the global military spending in 2020 would have been enough to pay for the Solidarity Response Fund that the World Health Organization was requiring. 7% of what we spent last year, it could pay for the COVID-19 universal vaccination. One day, 26 hours without spending in the military could save the 38 million people that are at risk from starvation at this moment. It's just a series of painful comparisons, because we see that the priorities of our governments are terribly misguided. And on the left, you can see the distribution, which is also heartbreaking, in the sense that you see that 10 countries spend 2/3 of the total, and the Nato alliance, it accounts for more than 56% of the world's total. So in order to spread this message, we had the global days of action, and we're happy to account for over 150 actions. Given the situation, many of them had to be online, because taking action in the street is still very limited for the COVID restrictions. But we're happy that we have improved on our online tools for activism, and we have also accounted for many brilliant street actions. So we have a nice combination this year in 27 different countries of all 5 continents. One of the other highlights was that we had 190 organizations endorsing our appeal this year. That was precisely demanding that governments reduce military spending and allocate those funds to face the global emergencies that we're now under, as the pandemic and climate change. We had 5 press conferences and 5 press releases. We had over 15 infographics. The figure that our Matt, our colleague from the UK, has just sent me is that the Twitter storm reached 34 million people. We had an op-ed by the High Representative Izumi Nakamitsu and the director of UN Women. They also made a statement. We got a decent coverage on media, despite our message being not so easy for them maybe. And these are a few street actions that we're very proud of, and that are for us always a pleasure, and it's very cheerful to see that people are taking action in the street. And you can see from the top left, the action in Washington, D.C., and the kite flying in Philippines. Then our colleagues from the UK in Menwith Hill. Maybe I'm sure they will talk about it later. For us here in the office, it's always very nice to see when people take action in the streets. And I've taken way more time than I wanted. I apologize for that, and I'm going to give the floor to my colleague Colin Archer, who's one of the founders of GCOMS, is a former IPB Secretary General, and I think is one of the most authorized voices when it comes to military spending. So Colin, the floor is to you.
Hello, I hope you can hear me.
Yeah.
Yes, everything fine. Well, it's very nice to be once again with AEPF. You know, I've missed you, but now is a chance to look back. In order to know where we are, we have to do some history, and this will be a very rapid survey of the roots of this campaign, which go back at least 200 years. The detail of what I'm going to say is available in written form. It is a chapter in the GCOMS book called Military Spending and Global Security, and you can get that from the GCOMS international website. Or you can write to me and I can send you the chapter. This is not a new theme. It really has been a topic in peace movement activity through many campaigns and many wars and many different situations. But although it's been a permanent concern, it's also been a neglected one. There's been talk about guns versus butter. That's the sort of standard technical term in economics. For well over 100 years, but there hasn't been much organized protest around it. The focus is often on specific aspects of the military system. I'm thinking about specific wars, Vietnam, Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on, or specific weapons, and especially nuclear weapons. There's been an economic theme within that, but it hasn't been brought out very much. And there are related themes as well that relate to the economy of war and the economic dimension of warfare. I'm thinking in the early 19th century of the emphasis that many prominent peace campaigners put on expanding free trade. They felt that if nations were trading with each other, they wouldn't be fighting. Well, sadly, that was proved wrong in the First World War, where countries that were trading very well with each other decided to engage in mass murder. There was also, of course, a wider critique of the capitalist system as a whole as being the system which generates war, and especially through its imperialist aspect. And in a way, there was a divergence between some of those who felt that that was the priority to bring about a socialist society, and those who felt that we couldn't wait for that dream to come true and that we had to stop wars meanwhile. And I think in some way we still have that difference of view today. Then there's the arms trade, which many people confuse with military spending. Of course, the arms trade is essentially private sector activity, private companies selling to governments in their own governments or abroad. But it's the military spending budget which provides the money to buy the weapons. After the First World War, there was a tremendous wave of activity around this under the heading shame on the war profiteers, because people realized that people in the private sector had made huge profits, from this massive slaughter that had taken place in the First World War. And there was a terrific reaction against, as well as a more general reaction against the military. However, we know that that phase resulted in a Second World War, and a whole new pattern of peace movement activity emerged during the Cold War. One interesting thing that begins to develop once the nuclear test ban treaty is signed in 1963 is a much broader critique of what came to be called the military-industrial complex. And of course, we have Eisenhower to thank for that term, but also for introducing this warning about the power of the economic interests behind the military. And the Vietnam War became the focus for the critique of the way that the military-industrial complex was operating. At the same time, we have an interesting development at the United Nations in that we begin to see a whole series of resolutions and even conferences inspired by countries of the South who are aware of the enormous sums being spent by the rich countries on weaponry and war, but also the desperate need for money for development. So the idea of disarmament and development becomes embedded in the United Nations system, and the rhetoric and the language of the international diplomacy. The high point of that is 1987, when there was a major UN World Conference on disarmament and development. It's almost impossible to imagine such a thing nowadays, but that was a key moment in focusing people's attention on this massive disparity. I would draw attention to the pioneering work of Ruth Sivard, who authored year after year for about 16 years, the World Military and Social Expenditures, which was a very accessible report, which was very useful for campaigners. We fast forward to 1990, the end of the Cold War, and we have this substantial reduction in military spending, and everybody is hoping that there's going to be a peace dividend. There begins to be talk about converting bases and transforming the military hardware, if you like, into different kinds of civilian activity, which goes a certain way, but not that far. And there's a new term invented, human security, to get away from the idea of national security. Then we come to 2001, and the whole picture transforms once again with 9/11 and the war in Afghanistan, and then following that Iraq, and we know the story. Military spending increases very rapidly, and there is a huge wave of peace movement activity, resulting in 2003, the biggest demonstration in history against the upcoming Iraq war. Now, I'm going to just focus for a couple of moments on the work of the International Peace Bureau, because it was in this context and with this long background that we decided to launch the program called Disarmament for Development, which grew out of our concerns for human security. And initially, we framed it rather broadly. Military spending was one aspect, but we also looked at the effects of weapons on development and the different ideologies and justifications for military spending. But we gradually focused in, and in 2011, as Kike has mentioned, we launched the Global Day of Action on Military Spending, now the Global Days. And this was a very good partnership initially with the Institute for Policy Studies in Washington, and then many partners came from all around the world. And I'm delighted now that we can say we have a truly global picture of partnerships and activities and protests all over the globe. In 2014, we decided to make it a year-round campaign, a permanent campaign. So we became GCOMS, of which GDAMS is part. Some people have difficulty with the terms, but I think it's fairly self-explanatory. In 2017, we closed the office in Geneva, moved the headquarters to Berlin, and the campaign was, if you like, hived off and is now run, as you know, from the team in Barcelona. And I'm delighted that with the work that they've been doing. Just a couple of final comments. The GCOMS offers something unique that we've never had in peace movement history, which is a structured, coordinated campaign on military spending on this crucial aspect of the military system, with a common branding and offering a kind of permanent continuity. And I think that is one reason why the campaign has been growing, because people feel secure that this is a permanent effort and it's well put together. In choosing this topic, we are all aware, I think, that we're confronting very powerful interests, both in government and in the military and in the private sector, who all benefit from this enormous mismatch of funding towards the military. And so it can be depressing, but I think that there's two very important reasons to be hopeful, and they are the two major global crises that we face. One is climate change, and the other is the pandemic, or shall we say pandemics. Clearly, these are a much greater, in moral terms, we have to be investing in those areas rather than the military. And I think we have a chance, in the light of those crises, to draw in new partners and to expand our work so that we can truly have a much greater impact. So good luck to everyone. I'm sorry this is very short, but it had to be 5 minutes.
The minimum 10 minutes.
Thanks a lot, Colin. Reiner, we heard you complain.
Yeah, I think it was a clear order that everyone should speak 5 minutes.
Well, but he had to give context. That's also my fault.
I had to do 200 years.
Yeah.
All right.
I have 200 years for the future.
I'm gonna take 1 minute from you, Reiner. Eh?
Yeah.
I'm sorry. I'm kidding. Well, let's move to our next speaker, Francesco Vignarca from Italy, from Rete, Disarmo, who has been a very solid partner for many years and has done an amazing job on military spending. Please, Francesco, first to you.
Thank you, Kike. Thank you all. I'm sorry I will have to leave after my intervention because of family reasons, but I wanted to underline what we are doing here in Italy, which is maybe not interesting for you because our news about our country, not yours, but can draw some, can give you some hints to what to do for the future. And also I will try to underline what's our next purpose, because if I'm able to share my screen, I can say that we tried to, help the spreading of information of the GCOMS campaign all over Italy. But, we tried also to build that in our national context. For instance, this year, this is the page we devoted to the GDAMS. And this year we asked, just before the budget of the Italian government, with another fellow group, which is Binalakshmi, to ask for them at least 1 year of moratorium of new weapons. For Italy, it's more than 6 billion euros a year. And we tried to underline the choosing between, money for military and money for the students, the school, the healthcare. And after that, since they decided not to do that, we had a follow-up campaign which is entitled in Italian they choose the weapons. So it's always important, like Colin just said, that we have a year-round campaign that not only works for the GDAMS, for the days of global action, but it's structurally engaging what we are doing every day. And we want to start from the figures. We have got this Observatorio Milex, which is a National Observatory on Military Expenditure, in which we can put out the real and concrete figures about the military expenditure in Italy. We can say that it's growing. We can break down what cost goes on the personnel, what goes on the weapons, and on the functioning. And this is important because it makes us reach out to a global audience. About the GCOMS of this year, we had this op-ed in Manifesto, which is the left national newspaper, and with a good prominence. And also we have this op-ed in Avvenire, which is the Catholic Church newspaper, daily newspaper. So showing us that we can really reach out to a lot of people. Of course, it's not easy to go on like this, but we got some good news at the end. Greenpeace Italy, with other Greenpeace, put out some results about a poll, and showing that 80% of Italian people are for a reduction of military expenditure, which is really good, and shows what? Shows that we can really reach out to people, and we can, raise the sentiment about that in the public opinion. What is the next step? The next step is the politics, because politicians, they don't listen to the people, they don't listen to our groups, they don't listen to our, all the figures that Kike at the beginning showed us, but they listen to the military industrial complex, and they keep saying that, arms industry, it's important for the economics, and so and so. No, it's not. And we're trying to show that also going on television, going on university, and having the help of people that studies economics. This is huge, this is crucial. And as a final say, I can say that it's also transversal to all other campaigns we are doing. We are doing campaigns against killer robots, against nuclear weapons, against the arms trade, but the backbone of all of this is the choice of the states and the choice of the public spending of money. So thank you at Kike, all the people at Centre de l'As and IPB for this campaign. We think is invaluable to have a year-round campaign about that. So maybe you can have some suggestion from Italian things we are doing here, but please contact me if you need more. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Francesco, also for sticking to the time and for making it to the meeting. I know you made the effort, and congrats on all the amazing work you've been doing in Italy. And I've been seeing that the numbers are very good in social media, so I think you're going in the right direction. Let's move to the next speaker, Meri Joyce from Peace Boat, Japan. Meri, the floor is to you.
Yes, sure. Thank you very much. And first, I'll say my internet is cutting out a little bit tonight, so I'm sorry if I disappear somehow. Hopefully, I'll make it through this okay. So I'm joining you today from Tokyo, from the Japanese NGO Peace Boat. Greetings from everyone at Peace Boat, to all old friends, new friends joining today. We've had the chance to be involved in GCOMS and GDAMS for quite some years now, often also coordinating events on board our voyages when they were able to run. I think it was in 2018 that we hosted the workshop of the Peace and Security Cluster from Asia Europe People's Forum on board the ship in Vietnam. So it's great to be able to reconnect, even though it has to be done online these days. And I hope it's not too long before we can once again get together in person as well. Peace Boat has also, of course, therefore been using online methods this year to be continuing our activities. Actually, right as we're speaking now, we're having our main event here in Japan for GDAMS, which is a workshop led by our youth volunteers at the moment. So I won't be showing any images or slides and so on, because that's all actually happening right now, but I look forward to sharing some of that with you once it's all finished online later and as well. As others have mentioned, despite, of course, the tragic impact that the pandemic is continuing to have, this has really proven such an important opportunity for people to be rethinking the necessity of, what security actually means, what is needed for our lives and our livelihoods, our planet to be safe, secure, and sustainable. And that's the same thing, of course, here in Japan in terms of a lot of the conversations that we've been having. Because I only have a couple of minutes, I'll just share very briefly about the overall situation here in Japan and one of the specific problems of militarism that has really come even more apparent under the current pandemic in our context here as well. So of course, Japan, despite technically not maintaining an army under its pacifist constitution, which is currently once again under threat under the current LDP government here in Japan. As you are all no doubt aware, Japan is one of the top 10 military spenders in the world and the second in East Asia after China, of course, from the 2020 numbers as well. This is something that actually surprises a lot of people here in Japan, given that the image that's often presented or tended to be presented about the country and this gap with really the reality. So a lot of the mobilization and the activities that we're doing is looking at raising general awareness of this and also Japan's role as this sort of military power within the context of the broader Asia Pacific region. So last year, Japan's defense spending was $49.1 billion US dollars, or 5.3 trillion yen, which is an increase from the previous year. In fact, it's been increasing every year since the second Abe administration has come in. And the new Prime Minister Suga, who came in last year, has pledged that this will also be continued from the future. He also has made these kind of promises for increased spending on his recent meetings with President Biden and so on. Yet at the same time as this, here in Japan, we're under our third state of emergency for COVID at the moment, once again, as we're experiencing the fourth wave here. Well, of course, the number of cases perhaps are not as high as some of the terrible situations that are being experienced in other parts of the world, including here in Asia. The hospitals here are in a very, very serious situation, according to most medical associations, really on the verge of collapse. The rollout of vaccinations is still less than 2%, despite Japan's economic situation. And on top of that, the government is insisting and really putting all its efforts now into the hosting of the Olympics, supposedly less than 2 months from now as well, despite the fact that most medical professionals associations and more than 60% of the public are calling for them to be either cancelled or once again postponed. So one of the things, according to our calculations, which we've been using in the media work this year, is if 1/5 of Japan's defense budget, which is the amount of new military contracts that were signed in 2020, were instead used to counter the COVID-19 situation, this would provide 15,000 ICU beds, 20,000 respirators, salaries of 70,000 nurses and 10,000 doctors. So these are really things which just, because of the situation we're now in around the world, I think has really made the relevance of GCOMS so much more real and tangible for so many people as well. And these different numbers, looking at this, I think just really shows the importance of these issues and how much it is so directly connected to our lives, not in an abstract way. And the final just brief example to share about how this militarism under COVID-19 is, which is, of course, connected to this competition with China and the situation as well. Okinawa, which of course is home to most of the US bases here in Japan, also has the highest COVID infection rate within Japan. This is not unrelated to the concentration of the bases there. As we know, military movements have historically often been responsible for spreading disease in this kind of way. And as our colleagues and activists in Okinawa have been pointing out, things like cases of the US military renting entire resort hotels for US military personnel to be having their families quarantining when they're coming in from other countries are really something which is of course inviting the antipathy of many of the local residents in those areas who are struggling. It was also exposed that the US military was planning for a nuclear submarine carrying many COVID-19 patients to dock in port in Okinawa. And so this is really showing how the pandemic has, in a way, exposed even further how the lives of these host communities around the US military bases and fallen Meri bases are threatened for the sake of the military safety. And of course, this whole situation is exacerbated by the military spending. So I'll end there, but just say as Peace Vote, as we're finishing off our GCOMS events for this year, we continue, as said, within this year-round campaign, looking forward to working together with you all. Thank you to everybody who's been involved in organizing it. This is really such an important opportunity to be continuing to raise awareness and encourage action as well on these issues towards genuine security for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Meri. Thank you very much. It was very interesting to see this incoherence in between what Japan stands for and then such a high military expenditure. And let's hope next year we can have a GDAMS action on board of one of the peace boat. It'll be very nice, like it was in other years, in previous years. I'm gonna move to our next speaker, Bina Nepram. I don't know if she's ready because I think she was on the phone. Bina?
I'm here.
Okay, thanks a lot. Then the floor is to you.
Yeah. First of all, thank you so much for organizing this meeting. It's a very, very difficult time. In fact, this is the first meeting where I felt I am not able to speak properly because during this meeting itself, I got news of the death of Vivek Raj Wangkhem in Manipur. Last 2 days, there have been like 5 deaths. It's a mayhem in Manipur and in India right now because of this pandemic. And so I just wanted to put that on record so that you know this kind of situation which is here back home. But also at the same time, I'm here because it's really important to strategize what is happening in our lives, in our nations, in our communities. It is wrong what is happening. India spends 3rd largest military spending in the world, yet it's begging for oxygen, it's begging for vaccines, it's no ICU beds, people are dying. As George Floyd said, we cannot breathe. So this is the current situation which affected Indian metropolitan cities, and now it's ravaging places like Manipur, which is mountain border areas, which are bordering Myanmar right now. So the situation is very grim. 12 to 14 people are dying right now in my home state, Manipur, because of this COVID. So as a result, the reflection on why United States and India, which spends some of the top military spending in the world, are not able to provide. And we have been saying this time and again. Now, the point is, how do we convert this into action so that we are not just talking about it, but doing something? And I'm so glad, our team here, IPB, GDAMS, GCOM team have been really at the forefront of letting the world know that we have to take charge. And thank you, Colin. It's good to see you after a long time. So it's really important that we keep this alive. So just a couple of things. What can I say? So I think currently a few things that I wanted to share was, as I mentioned, currently the world has more than, I don't know, millions, 136 million corona cases. India has 24 million right now, with over close to 300,000 dying because of this. Yet we are world number 3 in global military spending. We are 112 in the global gender index, and we are 94 in the hunger index. So this again is data which is out there, which GCOM, GDAMS teams have also really taken out through your good research. And again, the point is, how do we ensure that we hold our countries accountable to ensure that this money is spent on healthcare and not on warfare? So some of the points that I do remember in many of our meetings sharing is, what are the strategies? As Kike said, if you take a percentage of it, of this military budget, global military budget, it can help in fighting COVID. It can help in ensuring that we are not being deprived of basic things that citizens need, poor, like the right now who's suffering, the marginalized, the indigenous. So many of these things are at hand in our mind. What can we do about it? Even 10% of the global military spending could actually help attain not just COVID, but fighting poverty in the world. If you only take 10% of the global military spending, you could turn the way around, because looking at climate change, COVID is a result of how we have damaged our environment, how we have done injustice to our planet Earth. So there are many of these things which are needs to be strategized, and that's where I would take the work of GDAMS, GCOM, as well as the work that is going to happen at the International Peace Congress, which is going to happen in Barcelona in October, to be able to act to ensure that we hold our parliamentarians, our politicians, the policymakers at our local, national, and global level accountable to know that it's not COVID which is killing us, but their lack of action, their lack of sensitivity is creating this pandemic, genocidal pandemic, which is happening right now. I think with these few words, I will end, because in as much as there is this sadness, I would remember the power of Václav Havel. How do we give power to the powerless? How do we ensure that we have the agency to turn this around and not just make victims, but some of us who are lucky to be alive during this pandemic? How do we act together? And in one of our IPB meetings, CIPRI director had said, extraordinary situation needs to turn ordinary people into extraordinary actions to be able to bring this change. This is what I would like to work with all of us around the world, to be able to strategize how we can do this to turn it around, because enough is enough. Every single death matters. It's the love of someone's mother, someone's child, someone's parent, someone's community member, which hurts us. And so the COVID situation has made it really important for us, urgent for us to turn this around. And this is how I would like all of us to, in the next few days, months, to really come about with a strategy and hold our countries and our governments and our policy makers responsible for the appendicite that they have done to us, which must stop. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Pina, for your powerful words, and yeah, we understand the anger, because yeah, we're seeing the effects of poor poor choices from our representatives. Let's talk about it some more on the discussion, but now I want to move to our next speaker, to Reiner Braun, who's gonna give us context on Germany. But I also want to ask him, with a couple extra minutes, to talk about NATO, and particularly about the No to War, No to NATO network, which I believe is also important for this meeting, because we're seeing that NATO is one of the main drivers of military spending, and it has asked its member states to go for the 2%, and it's one of the justifications that we're fighting against. So Reiner, the first to you. You're on mute, Reiner. Thanks.
Thank you, Kike. Thanks to the Asian European People's Forum for putting these so important questions of military spending on their agenda and organizing these webinar. IPB is proud to be a partner of it. And I can also say that we are proud of this GCOMS campaign with the history Colin was telling us. And, you know, for me, and I would like to follow Bina, we are not speaking about cold data. We are speaking about people's life. And in the same time, we have this webinar about 10,000 children who are dying by hunger. So I think it is a very emotional and absolutely needed discussion, which the General Secretary of the United Nations summarized in this wonderful sentence: the world is overarmed and peace is underfinanced. I think this shows the reality of the world. And I would like to add only 3 data, and one is definitely related to NATO. NATO is spending 56% of the world military budget. It is the biggest military spender with 1.1 trillion. But this is again only half of the truth. When you are looking to some countries, I will take 2. Romania, they have an enlargement of the military spending by plus 26%. Hungary by 20%. Both countries are deeply suffering not only from the corona crisis, but they're also suffering from social underfinanced budget, from minimal budget for education and for science. And the top of these military budget is that NATO want to spend 2%. And this means quite the doubling against now. So we have the real situation that NATO is not only the largest military spender now, but in the future, they will still enlarge it. And again, this is only part of the truth. We have to add the new military alliances on the world. And I think I only want to mention one, which has a short name Quad: Australia, Japan, India, and the United States. They spend over 1 trillion for military purposes. And when you are looking to the countries in many of these regions, they are absolutely poor country. And I have not to repeat what Bina was saying for India. And the second truth is that when you count all military budget, NATO, European Union, is nearby to be the second largest spender of military purposes. They spend quite the same amount of money like China. And when you add Great Britain to the European Union, which you should not do this, but coming a little bit back to the history, then they are definitely on the second place. That is the brutal reality. And I think we also have to underline that military spending is not only the misuse of money which we need for social purposes and healthcare, but it is also the preparation of war. Last week, the Boston Institute announced the new figures of costs of war for Afghanistan. Only for this horrible war in Afghanistan, NATO spent between 3.2 and 4 trillion US dollars only for Afghanistan. And the new figures for Iraq are lying by 5 trillion. So all weapons which are developed, which are paid to the military industry, which makes a big profit from that, are also used. And these doubled the victims, and these doubled the destroyment which these military purposes are doing. What does this mean for strategizing? I think the first and very important point is we have to deepen and to enlarge our GCOMS campaign. We need more and new partners for the next years. Second, I think, and this is for me a key point, we have to come back, we have to go back to the streets. Definitely under the conditions of Corona, above all, the IPB office in Barcelona was doing a great job to continue organizing all these events. But next year, we definitely have to go back to the street. And I really would like to suggest that we are preparing for the next year a worldwide day of demonstrations against military budgets or against militarization. We have to come back to this wonderful idea of the 15th of February 2003, where 1 million of people were marching against the Iraq war. I know that this will not happen immediately with the fight against military spending, but we should start with common parallel demonstrations in so many countries in the world. And to discuss this and to discuss further steps for the fight against the military spending, I would like to invite you in the name of IPB to the IPB World Congress in Barcelona. This World Peace Congress hopefully will get new signs, new hope, new suggestions for actions against military spending and for a more peaceful world. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Reiner. Let's move to our next speaker, Laetitia Sedou from the European Network Against Arms Trade, who's been doing great work related to the European Defence Fund that was just approved, and I was hoping that she could shed some light on the current situation in the European Union and these militarizing trends that we're seeing. First to you, Laetitia.
Yeah, thank you, Kiki, and thank you to the Asia Europe Forum to organize this. And I really appreciate also the opportunity to wider a bit the discussion that we usually have with the EU, which is usually quite close to this EU bubble Brussels area, while in fact there are so many connections with what has been said before by Colin and Reiner and others too, about the process in the EU is not coming out of the blue, but really in line with the problems that have been mentioned and context. So this EU project of ENAAT about the militarization of the EU, which I think we can call it that way, is running since 2016, because there was really a kind of shift, especially I would maybe just explain briefly for the audience, which is not really aware of how the EU is and works. Normally, the EU as a body has been built for a peace-led project, and the EU as a body, as a intergovernmental organization, cannot act on the military. Any military action is led by the member states of the European Union, but the European Union per se and its budget, its common budget, could not be used for military purposes until very recently. It was a kind of taboo red line. So that's why I insist on this, because this red line and this taboo has been broken, and it has been broken in particular under a heavy lobby, of course, of the arms industry, of this military industrial complex that Colin was mentioning. And they don't hide at all about this anymore. I mean, what was usually a kind of negative term, military industrial complex, is today a positive one. The EU wants to build a European military industrial complex, definitely. So that's one of the purposes of this EU Defense Fund. And I will briefly show something, just a brief image, if you can see it. So I will not enter into the history of this, but the process has been very fast, as you can see on that. And 2 weeks ago, the European Parliament took the last final vote to accept that in the next 7 years, 8 billion euros of the EU common budget. So this is on top, of course, of the national budget of each member state, would go to research and development for new weaponry, with a focus on artificial intelligence, disruptive technologies, unmanned systems. So that's really a strong red line that has been crossed. And in parallel, you also have other elements where the EU budget is used for the military industry use. I'm not going into the details of that, because what I want to insist on is that behind the official arguments of this budget, which are, of course, they claim that this would be economy of scales, that member states are overspending because of duplications. The other argument is about creating jobs and growth in Europe. And of course, the final argument is that all this is meant to contribute to peace, that the European Union needs to have hard power in order to support its soft power. Of course, all these are things we do not believe at all in, of course, and there is a strong parallel with what Colin was saying at the beginning about this economic dimension of warfare. In fact, we know that this funding will help the arms industry not only to build new weaponry with public money, but also this will strengthen the global arms export. So it will really help them kind of subsidies to increase the export of European weapons in the world. It will increase the military spending because all this is on top, and the EU is itself still calling member states to continue reaching the Nato objectives that Reiner mentioned, about 2% of military spending. So in the end, what we can see, and this is what is visible from the official discourse of the EU, is that the objective, in fact, is to preserve the European way of life. And this is really the terminology that has been used by some EU leaders, and to defend the EU interests. So I would join what was said by Reiner, is that behind those kind of supposedly industrial programs to support an industrial sector, we have a form of preparation for war. We have a form of preserving a certain model, a certain economic model, a certain hegemonic economic model, which is threatened, and that the EU wants to contribute to protect. So in that sense, it's a very worrying, of course, process that we cannot count anymore on the EU as a kind of at least for a while, alternative, different system proposal. So we try to alert on this. We have a number of fact sheets and short papers in our website for those who want to know more. It is important that this is better known even at European level, because citizens are really not aware of this process, of this funding, or are kind of presented a very soft version about, we just do that to protect you. It's a Europe that would protect you. So we also joined the calls for more work on awareness raising, informing people, trying to dismantle this securitization narrative, this fear narrative about threat, external threats we need to protect against. We justify all this process. It's a long path, of course, but we definitely need to do it because no one else will do it for us. And yeah, I think I will leave it there.
Thank you so much, Laetitia, for bringing light to an issue that is not so often spoken about. And yes, there's a long path ahead for us, but yes, we need to put shame in the European Union for going in this direction. Let's move to our next speaker, Matt Fawcett from the GCOMS UK coalition. I'm looking forward for your presentation because you've done amazing work there in the UK, and yes, the first to you.
Hi there. Thanks very much, Kike. Yeah. So GCOMS UK is a network of 39 now different supporting organisations fighting what is quite a difficult political situation currently in the UK. So I'll just share, if I may, some slides to try and keep me to time. Can everybody see that? Great. Okay. So
yes.
So basically, the UK we had a greater than average fall in the economic output as a result of COVID last year, but we also spent more than the average increase in terms of military expenditure. But for GCOMS campaigners in the UK, the main issue this year really has been funding announced for this financial year rather than last. So as people may know, the UK published its integrated review in March, which included things like a UK Space Command, for example, so very focused on sort of high-tech military power projection. So we are going to see an over 10% increase in military expenditure this year, which is the biggest we've seen for 70 years. And probably the most significant announcement within that, which I'm sure many of you will have read about, is the abandonment of the sort of gradual process of nuclear disarmament, which the UK has been involved with for a number of decades. So it also comes as part of a swathe of changes to the UK priorities, really. So we've seen unprecedented cuts in support for health and poverty alleviation abroad. So that's really been one of the focuses, really, of our work this year, to talk about opportunity costs of military expenditure. So we've also seen the announcement, the much lauded announcement of a green industrial revolution. But what we've been trying to do here with the excellent work of Stuart Parkinson is to highlight how really we're not meeting our spending, current spending commitments do not match the scale of the challenge that we're aiming to address there. So we were very involved with the Twitter storm. We thought it was a really empowering and useful process, covering a whole range of different themes there, with many of the UK partners producing materials, which was very exciting to see. As Kike mentioned earlier, looking at the kind of statistics for that, certainly in the UK, we find it very difficult to break out of the more niche left-wing publications to sort of more mainstream media. And I think social media represents a really excellent way of sort of bypassing that really and getting the GCOMS message across to a whole range of new people, which wouldn't be possible if we weren't all working together. So it's been very useful. We've still got huge amounts to learn. I think, speaking for myself personally, I've a huge amount to learn from everyone here, I'm sure. But I think it was also very useful for the individual participants. People talked about increases in their own individual followers, and which is all useful to emphasize the importance of us all working together. So we created with the Help a Campaign Against the Arms Trade, we worked to try and lower the barriers really for people engaging their MPs, which is important at the moment as the main opposition's current focus is distancing itself from the previous leadership of Jeremy Corbyn. So we've seen the official UK opposition welcoming the current increases in arms spending. So we've done a number of webinars. I think the most important of those are those which have sought to create links with other social movements and struggles around the UK. So in the lead up to COP26, talking to climate change campaigners, and also doing webinars with campaigners working on pay for nurses, which is a particularly a sort of hot topic here in the UK at the moment. So we haven't just, as Kike said, been online only this year. There have been a few in-person events, not as many as we'd liked, and not as sunny as we would have liked, as you'll see by the photos. But yeah, again, it's a great opportunity to create images that are easily shareable on social media, and again, reach yet more people. So yeah, I think it's been a great pleasure to work with such a really diverse group of organisations as we have in the UK steering group for GCOMS currently. But we obviously have a tremendous amount more to do really. So this is really it's been an opportunity to sort of do some groundwork and increase our reach. But I think we still have a tremendous amount to do, and I can't wait to be on the streets next year with Reiner. So yeah, many thanks all, and keep up the excellent work.
Thank you, Matt. That's a great presentation, and I agree with every single point. Congrats for all the hard work. Let's move to our next speaker, Yonga Lee from People's Solidarity for a Participatory Democracy in South Korea. I actually forgot to include one of the pictures of them, but since I'm in this office, they always make some of the best street actions. So Yonga, first to you. I look forward to it.
Hello, everyone. This is Yonga from South Korea. I'm a coordinator of PSPD. Thank you for giving me a chance to share the current situation of South Korea and our activities related to military spending. South Korea's national defense expenditure has been rapidly increasing recently, exceeding $45 billion in 2020. For this year, the national defense budget is around $47 billion, the largest amount ever. According to the 2021 to 2025 midterm defense plan, the government plans to inject a total of $270 billion for national defense expenditure in the next 5 years. According to this, in 2024, it will exceed $53 billion. According to the separate report, the South Korea military expenditures for last year ranked number 10 in the world. South Korea has been the 10th largest military spenders for 8 consecutive years since 2013. South Korea is the 9th largest exporter of weapons and the 7th largest importer of weapons in the world from 2016 to 2020. South Korea is also the world's 3rd largest importer of American weapons, following the Saudi Arabia and Australia. South Korea's military expenditure is equivalent to 2.8% of GDP of 2020. The figure is quite high among the top countries in the military spending rankings. It is higher than the so-called neighboring countries, Japan and China. Meanwhile, South Korea's social welfare expenditure accounts for 12.2% of its 2019 GDP, the lowest among the OECD countries. The entire world is going through the unprecedented crisis due to the COVID-19 pandemic, and a serious economic downturn has followed it. It is very inappropriate to devote the enormous resources exceeding $45 billion to military expansion. The budget for public healthcare, basic livelihood, jobs, environment, ODA, etc., are still extremely low compared to the national defense budget. In 2018, the two Koreas agreed to disarmament in phased manner based on the military confidence building through the Panmunjom Declaration, and agreed on specific implementation plans such as the suspension of the hostilities and organized the Inter-Korean Military Joint Committee through agreement on the implementation of the historic Panmunjom Declaration in the military domain. However, the South Korean government has been increasing military expenditure and building a military forces since the Panmunjom Declaration. The military buildup made the dialogue difficult and destroyed the trust. It is contrary to the spirit of Panmunjom Declaration and for the disarmament in a phased manner, and dangerous enough to the completely lose the driving forces for the peace process on the Korean Peninsula. North Korea is criticized South Korea's purchase of state-of-the-art weapons and the ROK-US combined military exercise for the running corner of the inter-Korean agreements, and announced that it would continue to reinforce its nuclear and missile capabilities earlier this year at the 8th Congress of the Workers' Party. The vicious cycle of arms race has continued for the 70 years since the Korean War. If the South Korean government really wants the progress in the Korean Peninsula peace process, it must stop the increasing the national defense expenditures and purchasing excessive weapons. South Korea's military power is already overwhelming spread to the North Korea. South Korea's national defense expenditures surpassed the North Korea total GDP long ago, excluding the military expenditure of the US forces standing in South Korea. No further increase in the military expenditure is necessary. South Korea's conventional force improvement expense will only stimulate North Korea's nuclear and missile development and deepen the security dilemma. South Korea urgently to make a disarmament for inter-Korean dialogue, reduction of mutual threats and trust building. PSPD has been monitoring government policies and protesting against the excessive military buildup. As a part of its campaign, it published the reports on the major problems of national defense budget every year during the government budget review, and delivers its view to the National Assembly and the government. In addition, PSPD is a South Korean campaign coordinator for GDAMS and has been running campaigns against asking for the reduction of a military budget together with a number of peace and environmental organizations since 2011. It has conducted various activities to address the problem's excessive military expenditure and raise public awareness. For example, press conference, performances, video production, online activities, and media contributions. The call for reducing military expenditures is an argument that can hardly get sympathy from many people in South Korea, a divided country where the war has not yet ended, and the disarmament movement has been harshly criticized. But if military expenditure is not reduced, then meaning of human security and peace on the Korean Peninsula and in Northeast Asia cannot be achieved. This is why we must insist on talking about disarmament. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Yonga, and thank you for all the hard work you do within GDAMS. I invite everyone to take a look at the link I put on the chat and then see the reactions that they did this year, which is always very creative and very, very nice. Okay, let's go to our next speaker, Stefan Nieuwinkel from Pax Christi Vlaanderen, from Flanders in Belgium. Stefan, I have the first to you. Thanks for joining.
Dear friends, I feel honored to be in your company today. I'm the director of Pax Christi Vlaanderen for about 2 months now, so I'm quite new as a professional in the peace movement. It feels good to be surrounded with people who share ideas, goals and commitment for a world that doesn't submit to the logic of the military. Thanks to be here with me today. Thanks for giving me the digital floor on this meeting. We are nearing the end of this campaign to defund the military. It is always good to share successes and failures in order to learn from it. We considered it a success that a major Flemish newspaper published an opinion on military spending, written by a volunteer of our movement and myself. A few months earlier, when the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons got into effect, we weren't able to publish. So we were happy. Of course, what is the impact of a published opinion, even in the newspaper of intellectual Flanders? But even small successes are worth celebrating. And then now the bad news. We had a paid Facebook advertising campaign for the GDAMS, but we decided to stop it after 2 days. The return on investment in likes and clicks to the GDAMS action page was too low, and the negative comments were too many. Sometimes they say there is no such thing as bad publicity, but in this case, this wisdom fails. To learn of this, we have to look in depth. What was happening? As you know, Belgium is a NATO member. Of course, we have our obligations towards our allies. The major obligation is to spend 2% of GNP to military budget. And we just don't do that. Belgium doesn't even spend 1% of GNP to the military. So for many people, we are just a very bad pupil in the NATO classroom. Instead of complaining we spend too much, we better start to do our homework. Also for members of parliament, this is the main issue, not doing what we agreed with our partners. And one more thing, I'm new as a professional in the peace movement. I've been always interested in questions of peace. I know the CIPRI annual report since I was a teenager. I never heard about GDAMS, the action days, on one of my concerns. Now I know them, and for Pax Christi Vlaanderen, military spending was, is, and will be one of its major concerns. I feel the campaign needs to breach its relative isolation. So let's look ahead. GDAMS is not only about defunding the military, it is also about investing in a more sustainable world. If you emphasize the military spending, you are against something. If you emphasize sustainable development, you are for something. And even people who want to follow NATO obligations are for a sustainable world. Unfortunately, I have to mention the C word now, Corona, the pandemic that shocked the world. Corona costs a lot of money. Corona is shaking our economy. Corona obliges all governments all over the world to think about investment programs that have to be financed. Members of parliament are sensible for who has to pay. And maybe that's a momentum to say the military has to pay too. And what world do we want post-corona? Many people see the opportunity to choose for more sustainability, For us, these are all possibilities for new or strengthened coalitions, making the right decisions for the one world we live in, and then financing these decisions and let the military pay for their fair share. For the first time in history, the Belgian government decided to adopt a national security strategy. Pax Christi Vlaanderen is invited as a representative of civil society to advise the strategy. This Wednesday, we have a first brainstorm. I think we can make a strong point in linking sustainability and security. Only a sustainable world can be a secure world in the long term, and major sustainability disasters are threats to security, even as the military see it. I hope we can make a strong cause to defund the military by choosing for sustainability. I tell you next year if we succeeded. And thank you again for this opportunity to meet you all and to share some thoughts and a lot of hope with you. Thank you.
Thank you, Stefan. It's also a pleasure to meet you, and I hope we'll work together in the coming months. And yeah, you raised some important points. For example, how to deal with trolls online. This is something that we could have a webinar only for that. All right, let's go to our next speaker, and hopefully we'll have a very brief discussion because we've run out of time. Our next speaker is Karen King from Stop Fueling War in France. Karen, first to you.
Hello, and thanks for inviting us. We're really, really happy to participate, particularly because of the connections with Asia, and obviously it's very important to me. So I'm going to try and share my screen now, and I trust it will be visible. Right. Yes, I hope that works.
Yes, it's working.
Just a very brief overview of what's happening in France, not so much from the point of view of GDAMS, but it's a sort of a small, quick look at what's happening in France generally. Now, the French arms industry, well, you can see the increase, the very fast increase, from 15 billion in 2007 to 23.8 billion in 2017. In fact, this has been on an upward trajectory, so it's been going up ever since. France remains the world's third largest arms exporter after the US and Russia. And like many countries, but particularly, I think, in France, it uses its exports to pay for the research and development of new weapons. It's extremely important for France, the export sector. I think this is something that's really particularly peculiar to France, is that there's hardly any political opposition to the production and sales of weapons in France. It's viewed as desirable by both the French left and right political parties. And normally, I mean, in other countries, for example, you have the Greens in Germany, but you just don't have a movement in France. The peace groups so far have been focusing on nuclear weapons. So conventional weapon sales has hardly entered the political dialogue, if you like, despite the importance and the huge volume of sales. So it's a very big challenge. And I should also add that it has a huge support also from French media. It is very, very difficult to find in the mainstream media any opposition to weapon sales. Even you would have publications, probably the best known one that's perhaps considered left, Le Monde, hardly ever, if any time, publishes any negative views of French weapons sales and production. Like a lot of countries, but I think in France it's even more so, there's an extremely opaque system of reporting on weapons sales, weapons production. There's supposed to be a form of parliamentary oversight on the budget, but it's very hard even for the representatives to achieve this. A couple have told about questions that they've submitted, which they're legally entitled to ask and receive answers to, but basically they're just ignored. They just don't get an answer. So this is true for all weapon sales, except when they want to highlight a success story, like the recent sales of Rafale jet fighters to Egypt. So there was a lot of publicity about that. Now, in 2020, a large part of the increase was related to spending on equipment. It's 16% higher than the year before. And this is during a year of COVID. There have been more than 5 million cases in France, more than 106,000 deaths. But trying to make the link between spending on social welfare, in this case, health, and the huge military budget is actually very, very difficult in France because of the media silence on this issue. And because there is a consensus that weapons production is a very good thing in and of itself, because it provides employment, etc., etc. So trying to make that link to the general public is very difficult. So the military budget here, as you can see, it has gone up 4.5% compared to last year, even though France is still in this huge pandemic problem issue. And it's constantly increasing. Every year there's a military budget, a budget for military spending. And in 2020, it was actually passed without specific parliamentary approval because they said there wasn't enough time. And France will be the first and biggest beneficiary of the European Defence Fund that Laetitia has just spoken of. And so obviously they're very happy. Now, just a brief overlook about contracts to Asia. Thales, which is a huge French defense firm, has been selling surveillance systems, state-of-the-art radar systems to a lot of countries. And the latest one was to Bangladesh in 2020, but we don't know how much that was for. And of course, there's the infamous sales of Rafale to India for 7.8 billion euros. And that was, the contract was signed in 2016 and delivery came, the first deliveries came about last year. And in this year, earlier this year, there's been the beginning of a big scandal, corruption scandal, where Mediapart, which is a media source, did investigative journalism, and they found that 1 million euros had been handed over as a sweetener, if you like, to facilitate the arms sales, and it was given to a close collaborator of Prime Minister Modi. And now in France, there's an ongoing court case. So another rumor that has surfaced in February of this year was that France is ready to sell 36 Rafale to Malaysia, but there's been no confirmation available, and whether or not it's taking place, we just don't know. So that in a nutshell is what's happening in France. As I said, trying to communicate the impossibility. I mean, making the link between health expenditure and expenditure on weapons is, I wouldn't say impossible, but it's very, very hard, particularly now. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Karen, for the presentation. I think it's one of the goals of this webinar was to see the common strategies that we could find, but also the common problems that we have, and this problem getting to the media, or this or the problem challenging the hegemonic discourse when it comes to security, or the problem challenging the creation of jobs that the military industry is supposed to do. It's a common problem that we all work from in our different countries. So yeah, let's keep working on that. We've almost run out of time. Cora, you are the one in charge of the Q&A. Let me know if we have time for questions, discussion.
There's just one question that we have that is pasted in the chat box. Maybe we can answer that. One of you or two of you can do that. And then, well, if some of you would have some ideas that you'd like to share, I think we would end with that. And also, we would like to show you a 2-minute video from the Barcelona office. So that's how we will end. So let me read the question to all our panelists to share studies on use. Oh, wait, this is not the one. Sorry, I'm very sorry. I think this is a question coming from, I saw that, I'm sorry. Oh, dear honored panelists, this is the only question that we received coming from, I think, Diani Inda from Indonesia. Dear honored panelists, I would like to ask how can NGO or activists monitoring or demanding our government to reduce funding for weapons, instead we spend it for humanity and cure the COVID-19. How can we give the pressure to the government? That's the question. I know that at some point during the many presentations, this has been responded to, but anybody, I see Bina's hand raised. So Bina, why don't you respond to that question?
Yes, thank you from our friend from Malaysia who has asked this. This is again, yeah, Indonesia. Like what Reiner said, we need to go out into the streets. We need to think, and we need to go out, and we need to engage. So some of the strategies that we are planning in India and Indo-Burma border are as follows: hold our elected representatives accountable. Currently, India spends 1%, less than 1% of its GDP on health, and 3 times on the military. And that is not going to work. And few citizens collecting money for oxygen cylinders or giving 200 cylinders from other countries is not going to work. We cannot act on a begging bowl. So I think we really have to put pressure on our elected representatives so that in the parliament, in the members of the legislative assembly, they are doing what citizens' rights are in terms of health, protection. And as Reiner said, it's not just about COVID. It's about so many injustice in terms of planning that has been done. So we have to be very clearly strategic. While ideating happens at GDAMS, ideating happens at the Barcelona Congress, in our nation states, but I think we really have to do from local approach to, I think that. And also I just want to recognize Karen King's statement. In fact, yes, absolutely. This is what we are really furious about in India, is how the government has been putting a lot of stress on militarization. And as a result, we see what is a disaster. And our governments actually abandoned us. It's communities who are mobilizing through Twitter. People are left on our own right now. The guns are not going to inject the right vaccine for us anymore. The governments, both at the state and the central level, have abandoned us in India. So that is why we have to really turn it around. And again, as I mentioned, in fact, tomorrow we are having a COVID emergency meeting of concerned citizens in Manipur and in the rest of the country to be able to respond to this, because our government has simply failed us right now. So this is what the change that needs to be done right now. Thank you.
Thank you, Bina. Anybody else would like to respond to that? I know that we're running out of time now, and I'm supposed to sum up, but you know, how do you sum up such a very rich presentations you made? And the chat box, if you've read it, I hope that Kike, we can save that and shared, because there are simply so many links to resources that we could use and we could also share with our friends. At this point, I would really like to thank our panelists this afternoon for spending time from your busy schedule. This has been a very meaningful get-together that we have towards the end of the Global Days of Action on Military Spending. So Colin, it's really good to see you again after a long while. I know your hair has gone so long. Many of my friends are not having their hair cut until the end of the pandemic. Of course, Meri, Yunga, Laetitia, Karen, thank you so much. Our friends who just joined us this year, maybe, and I hope that many more of us will be joining in the next years to come. Reiner, I know you're still there, and of course, Bina and Matt, and my colleague, Kike. So any final word from you, Kike? Don't forget the video.
No, okay. I also want to thank all the speakers. And it was a challenge to invite so many people, but we wanted to have many representation from different countries and different campaigns. And yeah, we're very proud to have put together this team. And I hope that it will serve to create new synergies and to strengthen our collaboration. And just to wrap it up, I want to say that the next time we see each other, it'll be nice if it would be in person, to be face to face. So we would like to invite everyone to Barcelona's IPP World Congress, happening from the 15th to the 17th of October. Hopefully the pandemic will be more under control then, and then we can gather and celebrate and build new spaces for the peace movement. Should I play the video and we call it a meeting?
Yes, Kike.
Let me know if the audio works, because sometimes it doesn't. Is it working? Not the audio, right?
No audio here.
Wait.
The pandemic. Every problem we face, how does a feasible solution? There's a feasible solution to the pandemic. How do we know that? Because many countries are implementing. What about heating the environment? Yes, there are feasible measures that essentially meet the IPCC standards, give us a fair chance of solving the problem, even a better existence. Nuclear weapons, obviously, we know how to deal with them, get rid of them. Go case by case. There's almost nothing that we don't have a way to deal with. What's missing? The will and the commitment. Now, is organized human society capable of getting to that point? Your speculation's as good as mine. The only thing we can do is hope that it's true, put all our efforts and energy into trying to make it become true. There's no alternative.
So there's no alternative. We need to reimagine our world. Thank you so much to everyone. I don't know if anybody wants to say something else, but for me, it's been a pleasure, and I'm very happy to see you and to work with you. Let's keep the hard work and see you soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, so.
Thank you, Kiki.
Thank you.
Goodbye.